Last month, on a beautiful spring day, Scott and I, with other family members and friends, gathered in Louisiana, Missouri, a small town just 30 miles south of Hannibal, which is where Samuel Clemens, aka Mark Twain, grew up. There, in the Riverview Cemetery, on a bluff overlooking Old Man River, the mighty Mississippi, we interred the ashes of my wife, Claire, in her family plot. Claire died last year after a long illness. In the intervening year, I have spent much time thinking about who am I now as a single person. After 33 years being in a partnership, now I was a solo act. Before it was always David and Claire, now just David. I realized that things weren't the same anymore, that I wasn't the same anymore. And I made a concerted effort not to try to keep everything the same, not to stay rooted in the past, instead to change some things, but carry forward others. Still, this question of who am I now continues to echo inside me, because I feel I am both the same person and yet not the same person. Now, this paradox of how or whether sameness, identity, persists over time is one that has been discussed and debated for thousands of years. I think it first entered my consciousness in college, where, as a classics major with a focus on ancient Greek civilization, I encountered one of my favorite sayings from a pre-Socratic philosopher, Heraclitus. He said, "No man ever steps in the same river twice." Heraclitus is saying that the river is not the same because the river is constantly flowing, constantly changing. And yet, we feel the Mississippi that Mark Twain saw as a boy in Hannibal is the same river that I saw from the cemetery last month, even though it was separated by 30 miles and 180 years. How is it both the same and not the same? This paradox was highlighted by the Greek philosopher Plutarch, who lived 600 years after Heraclitus, in his famous thought experiment called the Ship of Theseus. For those of you not up on your Greek mythology, Theseus was a prince of Athens. At that time, Athens had to pay tribute to the island kingdom of Crete by sending them 7 youths and 7 maidens every 9 years, where they would then be thrown into a labyrinth, home of the monstrous Minotaur, never to return. Our hero Theseus volunteered to be one of the youths to go to Crete, where he vowed to slay the Minotaur. So he set sail on the next tribute ship, and of course he succeeded and returned victorious. As Plutarch tells it, the grateful Athenians preserved the ship of Theseus to commemorate his victory. Although I can't help thinking it was turned into a tourist attraction with Ship of Theseus t-shirts and other paraphernalia. Plutarch tells us that the ship survived for hundreds of years, but over time, its wooden planks began to rot, and one by one they were replaced until eventually all of the planks had been replaced. The question posed by Plutarch is whether this is still the ship of Theseus, or is it a new ship? Now, some people take this thought puzzle too literally and try to get cute in answering the question. They'll say things like, the ship is made of more than just wooden planks, or what if a plank is replaced while Theseus is still the captain? Or is it still the ship of Theseus if he sells it to his buddy Heracles? But these are just attempts to avoid the real question being asked, which is, if all of an object's component parts are replaced, is it still the same or is it not the same? One school of thought holds, yeah, it is the same. 2 arguments are often made to support this view: gradualism and essentialism. Gradualists argue that the ship is the same after the first plank is replaced, and it's the same the next year when the second plank is replaced, and so on over a period of time until eventually all the planks are replaced. The ship maintains a continuity over time while its components are gradually replaced. But suppose the replacement is not done gradually, but all at once, over a short period of time, say a few days. At the end of that week, would the ship with all new planks be the same? The issue becomes clearer in a simplified version of the problem called the grandfather's axe. which goes like this. This is my grandfather's axe. My father replaced the head. I replaced the handle. My son added some tape to the handle. Is it still my grandfather's axe? Essentialists would say yes, for they argue it's not the components themselves which matter or the speed of the changes, but whether the object retains its essential property, its axeness, or its shipness. But it can be difficult to identify what is an essential property as opposed to an accidental property. This idea of essential versus accidental properties is discussed in a Crash Course episode on YouTube. If you aren't familiar with them, Crash Course is a series of short videos on a wide variety of topics hosted by Indianapolis author John Green and his brother Hank. I highly recommend them. In one Crash Course philosophy video, Hank talks about how a dog could get a poodle cut or lose its tail, and it would still be the same dog, that those aren't essential properties of dogness. Something like this actually happened in my family when I was a kid. We got an adult standard poodle named Tracy, and she was as shaggy as a sheepdog. But as summer approached, we had her groomed. When we picked her up from the grooming shop, they brought out this dainty dog with a poodle cut. My father exclaimed, "That isn't the same dog," but of course it was. So returning to the ship of Theseus puzzle, a different school of thought is that the ship with the replacement planks is no longer the ship of Theseus. It's a new ship. Those holding this opinion must decide when does it become a new ship. Some say it's after the very first change. As soon as you make a change, new ship. Some say it's not until the very last change. And others say it's somewhere in the middle, such as when more than 50% of the planks have been replaced. But this raises other issues, which we'll discuss momentarily. First, I want to mention a significant variation on the ship of Theseus paradox that was introduced in the 17th century by the philosopher Thomas Hobbes. What would happen, he asked, if the original planks were collected as they were being replaced and were later used to build an exact replica of the ship? Which ship, the one with all the replacement planks or the one built from the original components, which is the ship of Theseus? That should give you something to talk about during coffee hour. By now, you're wondering if this is a philosophy class or a church sermon. Let me answer that by returning to Heraclitus's maxim. What I told you is the way it is usually reported. But the complete saying is, no man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river, and he's not the same man. He's not the same man. And that's true. We are constantly changing, and every 7 years, all of our cells have been replaced. So if you believe that replacing all of the planks in the ship creates a new ship, what does that say about each of us? If you subscribe to the body theory that our identity persists over time because we're in the same body, as many people do, then you're facing the same questions as the ship of Theseus problem. Since our bodies are constantly changing and our cells are completely replaced every 7 years, is the you that is here now a different person than the one from 7 years ago? And if that's the case, then how can you be accountable for the promises and mistakes made by that other you? Do you really own the house you bought 15 years ago? Should a prisoner be released from prison after 7 years because they're no longer the same person who committed the crime? Our society is predicated on the idea that you are the same person you were last year and all of the years before that. Now, others, such as 17th philosopher John Locke, argue our identity resides not in our physical bodies, but in our mental states, in our consciousness, our memories and thoughts and feelings that form a chain of connectedness from the past to the present. So that's what persists. But is that really the case? How far back do your memories go? Certainly not to when you were an infant. And what about older adults who suffer from Alzheimer's or someone who has amnesia or other brain injuries? Do they become a different person when their memory chain has been broken? And then there are those who believe everyone has a soul, which determines their identity. This raises a lot of difficult questions, such as whether the soul exists and the relationship between the soul and the body. But, like in our first reading, we'll leave these problems for another time. Perhaps the most intriguing argument is offered by 18th century philosopher David Hume, who says that our identity doesn't persist over time, that our self is just an illusion. Instead, we are a bundle of impressions consisting of lots of different things, including our bodies, our memories, our emotions, even the opinions others have about us. And this bundle of things is constantly changing. New things come in, old things go out. Hume claims that our identity is really no more than a label for this ever-changing bundle. Another famous thought experiment about identity has been playing out on our TV screens for many years. Suppose, at some point in the future, say in the 23rd century, we invent technology where a person could step into a machine and all their molecules could be disassembled here and transmitted to another machine somewhere else, where their identical physical and mental attributes could be reassembled from similar organic material. You know, beam me up, Scotty. Is the person who arrives in the transporter the same person who left? Or is she a different person? 20th century philosopher Derek Parfit agrees with Hume that identity is really just a label and a constantly changing bundle. But he would say that the person who arrives in the transporter is a new person. But Parfit feels we do retain a psychological connectedness to our past selves, and these connections can weaken and are broken the further back in time we go. So we are no longer connected to baby you, but we are connected weakly to our child you through a few connections such as love of our family. And we have many more connections to the person we were 7 years ago, and very strong connections to that other person we were before this sermon started. This provides an answer to our question about accountability, our accountability for the actions of our past selves. According to Parfit, our degree of responsibility corresponds to the strength of our connection to that person you were when the obligation was incurred. Our legal system recognizes this to some extent by not holding adults responsible for actions of their juvenile selves. And even though our connection may be weak to the person we were when we bought our house 30 years ago, Parfit would say that the act of living in the house, of maintaining it and raising a family in it, has continuously renewed that connection to the house. Finally, it's not just people that have an identity, organizations do too. And components of an organization are constantly being replaced. The people, the staff, the facilities. For example, consider the Indianapolis Colts. Are they the same team that played in Baltimore in the 60s and 70s? And what about UUI? Our members come and go over time. We add a new sanctuary and solar panels. We even have our own labyrinth, sans Minotaur. So you may choose to view that each change brings about a new UUI. But I would agree with Parfit that the act of being together in community, of maintaining our buildings and properties, of pledging, of worshiping together, these acts continuously renew our commitment to and reinforce the identity of UUI. Now, that'd be a great way to end the sermon, but I need to tell you one more story about Theseus and his ship. And like the best Greek stories, it is a tragedy. So, Theseus' father, King Aegeus, was distraught when Theseus decided to sail off to Crete. He made Theseus promise that were he successful in defeating the Minotaur, he would change the ship's black sails of mourning to white sails for the voyage home to Athens. Every day while Theseus was gone, the king would stand on the cliffs of Cape Sunion watching for the ship to return. In the midst of the celebration of his victory, Theseus forgot to change the sails. When the king saw the black sails, he threw himself off the cliff and perished in the sea below. And since that day, it has been called the Aegean Sea. Now, I don't know what this story tells us about the relationship between fathers and sons on this Father's Day, but I wish all of you full sails and safe voyages as you go forth this week. Blessed be, and amen.